The Dating Game Killer by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
In the spring of 1978, Rodney Alcala was still a person of interest in the disappearance of New York socialite Ellen Hover. During his FBI interview a few months earlier, he told investigators he'd been with Hover on the day she went missing. He claimed to have dropped her off at her apartment following a photo shoot and had no knowledge of her whereabouts after that. Alcala was vague about exactly where he'd taken her, but when NYPD questioned one of his acquaintances, they learned he frequently traveled to a remote area of Westchester to take pictures. Investigators soon focused on a section of cliffs overlooking the Hudson River. The area was large and heavily wooded, but Detective Donald Tasic of the Missing Persons Bureau took it upon himself to keep searching until he found Ellen Hover. Tasic returned to the remote locale 24 times searching for signs of the missing young woman. He was on the verge of giving up when he spotted what appeared to be items of clothing half hidden in the underbrush. For a moment, he held his breath. Many times over the past weeks, he'd come upon an item that turned out to be nothing more than trash left by a camper or hiker. But this time, as he approached, he saw a bra and woman's undergarments. He bagged them and headed back to New York, his determination renewed. When he returned the following day, he brought a garden hoe he'd borrowed from a neighbor. Not far from where he'd found the clothes, the detective noticed a long, whitish shape half buried under some rocks. He cleared the spot with the hoe and within moments found what he immediately recognized as a human leg bone. Though it would need confirmation by the medical examiner, Tasic felt certain he'd found Ellen Hover. Almost a year after her disappearance, the public was informed that the case was now officially a murder investigation. Within days, a young woman called and asked to speak with NYPD detectives. She said she knew the area of Westchester where the remains were found. In fact, she'd been out to the very spot the year before with a photographer who'd taken pictures of her. His name was Rodney Alcala. On the other side of the country, Santa Monica police were dealing with a missing person case of their own. On Wednesday, June 28, 1978, they received a call that Charlotte Lamb hadn't shown up for her job as a legal secretary that week. Her sister Celia had been calling her since Monday to wish her a happy 32nd birthday, but the phone had gone unanswered. Investigators soon learned that Charlotte had spent the previous Friday night at Moody's, a new club in Santa Monica. The following day, her car had been ticketed for parking overnight at a structure not far from the club. 2 days later, the car was still there. It was clear that when Charlotte left the club, it hadn't been in her own vehicle. Police were dispatched to Charlotte's apartment later that Wednesday. No one responded when they knocked. The door was locked and showed no signs of forced entry. They found the building manager who let them in. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. A TV guide was open to Friday the 23rd, the night she'd gone to Moody's. It appeared she hadn't been back since. Celia provided a list of her sister's friends and family members, and the officers began contacting them. With each call, the response was the same. No one had seen Charlotte Lamb all weekend, and no one knew where she was.
Okay, Arisha, I want to tell you a story.
Okay, I'm pulling up my weighted blanket.
Okay, once upon a time, there was a young woman with hair as black as ebony and eyes the color of violets.
And her name was Snow White.
And her name was Elizabeth Taylor. And instead of 7 dwarves, our leading lady has 7 husbands, plus the best jewelry collection you've ever seen. Listen to the life and loves of Elizabeth Taylor on Even the Rich on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free.
In Wondery's new podcast, Killer Psyche, retired FBI criminal profiler Candace DeLong dissects the thoughts and motivations of the most infamous felons in history. With a career spanning nearly 5 decades, she sat across the table from hundreds of criminals. Follow Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening right now.
From Wondery, this is Hollywood and Crime. I'm Tracy Patton with Stephen Lang. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend going back to listen to episodes 1 and 2. We'll be waiting for you. This is episode 3 of The Dating Game Killer, Bachelor number 1.
From Hollywood, the dating capital of the world, it's The Dating Game. Here's the star of our show, your host, Jim Lang. Hey!
On September 13th, 1978, Rodney Alcala sits in shadow behind a curve of wall on the Dating Game set. He listens as a few feet away, host Jim Lang saunters onto the stage to thunderous applause.
One is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed.
Rodney chuckles to himself as the audience laughs. He's familiar with the show's penchant for raunchy double entendre, and he's prepared to play along.
Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala.
The camera moves into a tight shot of Rodney as the lights reveal him to the TV audience. He smiles broadly, nodding in self-confidence, as the crowd welcomes him warmly. It took him over an hour this morning to prepare for his national television appearance. First, he selected his favorite brown leisure suit and white dress shirt. Then, standing in front of the mirror, he had to decide just how many shirt buttons to leave undone, before slipping the wide lapels over his jacket collar. Finally, the crowning touch. Hairspray in hand, he brushed back his dark curly hair to resemble a lion's mane. He left the house, knowing he couldn't lose.
Here is a young lady with a wealth of experience. She once earned a living massaging feet, but she quit when her boss suggested that she work her way up. Then she taught school in Phoenix, Arizona, and now she's here to educate our 3 bachelors in the art of war.
When asked to introduce himself, Rodney confidently tells her, "We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl." And there is never a doubt in his mind that he will win out over these 2 clowns. He told them as much backstage. He looked one of them dead in the eye and told him, "I always get the girl." And the guy backed off, of course. These 2 are nothing, he assures himself, and there's no way she won't see that. When the game begins, he parries with Cheryl, matches her innuendo for innuendo, sexy for sexy. When she asks him what the best time is, he answers, "Nighttime." "Why do you say that?" she wants to know. Rodney searches briefly for the right response, deciding on, "Nighttime is when it really gets good." When she asks him to pretend he's a dirty old man, he growls and tells her to get over here and take it. Finally, she tells him she'll be serving him for dinner and asks, "What are you called and what do you look like?" Now Rodney is in his element. "I'm called the Banana," he says, fully self-assured, "and I look really good." When she asks him to elaborate, he just says, "Peel me." Cheryl laughs and the audience applauds enthusiastically. Rodney smiles, knowing his answer is a topper. "Later, Bachelor One," she cautions him. "Later." Finally, host Lang announces that the moment of truth has arrived.
You heard from the bachelors. You got some great dramatic presentations, some good answers, but now I'm going to ask you a question. Will that date be Bachelor number 1, Bachelor number 2, or Bachelor number 3? Who gets the dates?
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take 1.
Number 1, Bachelor number 1, all right.
Rodney flashes his best smile, happy, though not at all surprised. Relaxed and confident, he presents the image of a man comfortable in his skin, at home in the world.
And this is your date, and I want to tell you something about him, Cheryl. He's a skydiver, so he's got a lot of nerve. He's into motorcycling. He's also a fine photographer. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on, say hello.
Rodney walks out from behind the barrier, bending to give Cheryl a quick embrace and kiss. He keeps his arm around her, his hand resting lightly on her waist. Host Lang tells the newly minted couple about their upcoming date, tennis lessons from a pro, and a trip to Magic Mountain Amusement Park. Then he sends them backstage to relax, meet each other, and get acquainted. Just as when Rodney was hired by the LA Times, the show's producers haven't run a background check on him. His self-described interests include motorcycling and skydiving. His career, professional photographer. No one on the dating game is aware that Bachelor number 1 is also a twice-convicted felon and registered sex offender, that he spent 6 years in prison, or that he was questioned in the Hillside Strangler case and is considered a person of interest in the murder of a young woman in New York. As he goes backstage to get acquainted with Cheryl Bradshaw, he basks in the confirmation of what he told his fellow contestants before the show. Rodney Alcala always gets the girl.
In January 1979, the LAPD announced a breakthrough in the Hillside Strangler investigation. Cousins Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bono were arrested and charged with the murders. 2 of the police theories proved right. There were, in fact, 2 killers, and the reason the homicides ended suddenly was that one of them had left Los Angeles. Bianchi had relocated to Bellingham, Washington in early 1978 after a quarrel with his domineering older cousin. But on January 11th, he returned to his lethal pastime in Bellingham. He raped and murdered 2 young women after luring them with the promise of a house-sitting job. Unlike the crimes he committed with the fastidious Bono, the excess of evidence at the scene led to Bianchi's capture within days. Faced with compelling evidence against him, Bianchi pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He claimed to suffer from multiple personality disorder and said the murders were committed by one of his alter egos, Steve Walker. Though several psychiatrists supported this self-diagnosis, it was soon discovered that a real Steve Walker existed. But he wasn't one of Bianchi's imaginary personalities. He was a psychology student Bianchi had once attempted to impersonate in order to start his own therapy practice. It turned out that psychology was somewhat of an avocation for Bianchi. His bookshelves were filled with volumes on the subject. Once authorities confronted him, Bianchi admitted he'd been faking. His only chance for leniency was to plead guilty and testify against his cousin. At trial, Bono maintained his innocence and was found guilty. He received life without the possibility of parole. Bianchi got 118 years. As part of his plea agreement, he consented to sit down with LA detectives to shed light on the string of murders attributed to the Hillside Stranglers.
In the aftermath of a shocking crime, people always ask why. Who would do something like that? Was it about power, ego, revenge? What makes people like that tick? In Wondery's new podcast, Killer Psyche, retired FBI criminal profiler Candace DeLong dissects the thoughts and motivations of the most infamous felons in history. With a career spanning nearly 5 decades, she sat across the table from hundreds of criminals and spent countless hours inside their minds. In every episode of Killer Psyche, Candace will unravel the psychology and instincts of America's most complex and disturbing figures, including high-profile cases that she personally worked on, like the Unabomber, and other cases like Christopher Dunch, a.k.a. Dr. Death, where her training and experience can help us understand what was going on inside his head. Was he delusional or a cold-blooded killer? To hear the gripping details of the most chilling criminals' minds in modern history, follow Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen to new episodes early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.
Rodney is in a blind rage. Making it worse is the fact that he can't show it. He knows he has to act as if it's no big deal. Has to do what he's learned so well. Be the charming, good-natured Rodney. The Rodney everyone likes. The Rodney who wouldn't hurt a fly. That Rodney would take it in stride that his game-winning performance will come to nothing, that he'll never go on the date he was promised. The show's producers assure him he'll still receive the tennis outfit and lessons, and he can take that trip to Magic Mountain with anyone he likes. It just won't be with Cheryl Bradshaw. When he asks why, they fumble around for an explanation, citing only Cheryl's sudden unavailability. What they don't tell the winning contestant is that upon meeting him backstage, Cheryl took an instant dislike to Bachelor number 1. That she told producers Alcala was creepy and off-putting. That his attempts at charm were too smooth, insincere, and practiced. When the couple left the stage, he didn't seem to know the show was over and it was time to be real. Instead, he continued the sexy performance that had won the audience's approval and gotten him the date. And when he came uncomfortably close and murmured in her ear that this would be a date she'd never forget, she knew it was a date that would never happen. She quickly found the show's producers and told them to make up any excuse they wanted, but she wasn't going to Magic Mountain or anywhere else with Rodney Alcala. She said she had come to the show with the real hope of meeting someone, but she had to trust her instincts. When friends or family ask Rodney how his date went, he answers vaguely or changes the subject. He jokes that he never took the show seriously anyway. LA is a big place, and there are a lot of women out there. He isn't concerned about getting a date.
By early 1979, Los Angeles citizens could relax in the knowledge that the men responsible for the Hillside Strangler murders were finally behind bars. But the police were still left with a mystery. Kenneth Bianchi had agreed to help investigators clear the cases attributed to him and Angelo Bono. They showed him photo after photo of victims, and he would nod or say, "Yes, I did that one," or "No, not her." The unclaimed murders were usually cases authorities had been uncertain of all along. But one was particularly perplexing, since it bore all the signatures of the Hillside Stranglers. Her name was Jill Barcombe, but Bianchi insisted he wasn't responsible for her killing, had never seen the young woman in the photographs. Investigators knew better than to take anything Bianchi told them at face value. But he had already been effectively sentenced to life in prison and had little to gain by lying. Like most serial killers, he had a near-perfect memory of his crimes and hadn't been shy about disclosing intimate details of the most heinous acts. And he had already freely admitted to other unsolved homicides. Why would he stop short of admitting his guilt in Jill Barcombe's murder? And if Bianchi and Bono weren't responsible, who was?
The day before Valentine's Day 1979, Monique Hoyt sticks out her thumb and smiles at the cars passing on the downtown Pasadena street. As an attractive 15-year-old female, she doesn't imagine it'll be long before someone decides to give her a ride. Sure enough, it's only a minute or two before a car pulls over to the curb. A handsome man leans toward the passenger window, giving her a wide, friendly grin. He asks where she's going, and she tells him, "Anywhere but here." Monique gets into the passenger seat and they drive off. The man says his name is Rodney Alcala, and he's a photographer. He motions to the back seat, which is filled with camera equipment. He tells Monique how pretty she is and asks if she'll let him take some photos of her for a contest he's entering. She wonders why this grown man is trying so hard to impress a teenage runaway. But he seems okay, and it's not as if she has anything else to do with her day. Rodney tells her he knows the perfect spot for the photo shoot, just outside Banning, California. He drives east for over 2 hours, then turns onto a deserted mountain road. "It's just up in these woods," he says as the car pulls over onto the dirt shoulder. He grabs his camera bag and tripod and they get out. It's several minutes of trudging through the underbrush until they reach a little clearing some distance from the road. Rodney sets up his tripod and snaps off a few quick shots. After a while, he asks if she'd be okay doing some nude shots. She feels funny about it, but he persists, telling her it's normal for photography shoots. Real models do it all the time. Finally, she agrees. He takes dozens more photos, all the while telling her how great she looks. After over an hour, Monique gets bored and puts her clothes back on. Rodney suggests they do some silly ones, just for fun. He tells her to pull her shirt up over her head. She thinks it's weird, but goes along with it. As soon as the shirt covers her eyes, something slams into her head, and the world goes dark. Monique has no idea how long she's been out, but when she comes to, she feels an incredible throbbing pain in her head. He must have hit her with something hard. She can hear him breathing very close to her, and decides to keep her eyes closed, play dead. Then she realizes her pants and underwear are off again. When she finally opens her eyes, his face is inches from hers, lips curled in a feral snarl. Then his hands circle around her throat, and she can't breathe, can't even gasp. The pressure builds until her head feels like it's going to explode, and then there's nothing but blackness. It's dusk when Monique comes to again. Cautiously, she opens her eyes and sees her attacker lying beside her. His shoulders are heaving slightly, and he's murmuring into the crook of his arm. She's startled to realize he's crying. Thinking quickly, she decides the only chance she's got is to befriend him. If she can somehow make him believe she's okay with what he's done, maybe he'll let her go. Softly, she asks him what's wrong. His head tilts toward her, but he doesn't say anything. She maneuvers her bound hands close enough to touch him. In a whisper, she asks him not to tell anyone what happened, as if she's the one who might get in trouble. It seems to work. She can feel his body relaxing beside her. Then she asks if maybe they can go to his place so she can get cleaned up. Finally, he turns toward her, though he avoids meeting her eyes. Without a word, he undoes her binds. He gathers his camera gear, and they return to the car in silence. Driving back down the mountain, Monique looks straight ahead through the windshield, afraid of damaging whatever tentative rapport she somehow established with her attacker. The slightest false word or action could still get her killed. They reach the foothills, and for the first time since the assault began, Monique thinks she might make it out of this alive. There are vehicles all around them, people entering and exiting stores in the little strip malls. A car pulls up next to them and she can see the driver's face. It's all she can do to keep herself from signaling to him. But no, not when she's this close to freedom. Her captor could still turn the car around and disappear back into the hills to finish her off. So she looks down at her feet, controls her impulse to grab the door handle and run out into traffic. Nor does she betray any reaction when Alcala pulls into a drive-thru and buys a soda, then parks. He tells her to wait in the car while he uses the restroom. She responds with just the slightest nod, then watches as he strides across the parking lot. It's only when the men's room door closes behind him that she jumps out of the car and starts running for all she's worth. The agony of her injuries seems distant now, buried in the exhilaration of escape and the knowledge that she has survived. She dashes into a nearby motel and begins screaming for someone to call the police. Guests and staff look over at the wild-eyed teenager yelling incoherently about being kidnapped and raped. The desk clerk calls the police, and the first cruiser arrives within minutes. Officers spread out to the nearby parking lot, but the car is gone. They take the 15-year-old to the police station, where she gives precise details of the assault. Detectives show her a series of mugshots based on her description of the attacker. Without hesitation, Monique points to the photo of Rodney Alcala.
Picture this. You're Elizabeth Taylor, all dressed in white, walking down the aisle. You're also just 18 years old, but you're already one of the most famous movie stars in the world. You have a talent for becoming the characters you're playing, and today is no different.
So this is a wedding scene in a movie?
No, this is a real-life wedding, but every detail has been chosen by MGM. The dress, the flowers, the groom.
Wait, what?
Yeah, in the Hollywood studio system, arranged marriages are a fact of life. And today, Elizabeth will either have to say I do to her groom or say I don't to her career.
Ooh, that's a tough choice. What does she do?
Well, she pulls a move I didn't see coming. But to find out what happens next, you'll have to listen to the newest season of Even the Rich, The Life and Loves of Elizabeth Taylor. Follow on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free.
Looking for the hottest takes and the spiciest celebrity gossip? Look no further.
Welcome to Rich and Daily, the all-new podcast from Wondery that's going to bring you up to speed on all of Hollywood's most current secrets and scandals. Need to know what Harry and Meghan are up to? What's the latest in Britney's conservatorship hearing? We've got you covered. I'm Arisha Skidmore-Williams, and along with my bestie and fellow celeb news fanatic Brooke Sifrin, we're bringing you the latest entertainment gossip every Monday through Friday. Is that rumor you heard about Rihanna true? If it is, you better believe we'll have something to say about it. So if you want to be in the know about who's been seen with whom and who's in and who's out, join us on Rich and Daily, because we don't just listen to the rumor mill. We give you the celebrity facts as they happen. Listen to Rich and Daily on Amazon Music, or you can listen to episodes ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. With Rich and Daily, feel the gossip. Wondery, feel the story.
On June 13, 1979, Kathy Bowman was getting a little concerned about Jill Parenteau. It wasn't just that she hadn't called for their routine morning chat. Jill had been to a Dodger game the previous night on a date with an old school chum Kathy suspected might turn into a romantic interest. Normally, Jill would be eager to fill her friend in on the details. When Kathy tried reaching her at work, she learned that Jill hadn't come in that morning. After repeated phone calls went unanswered, Kathy asked Jill's boss to send a co-worker over to her place to make sure everything was all right. Less than an hour later, a call came in to the Burbank Police Department. A woman was talking incoherently about a dead body in a building on Peyton Avenue. When units arrived at the address, they found the woman standing outside a closed apartment door on the second floor. She was distraught, unable to get the words out. While one officer tried to calm her down, another checked the exterior walkway, where he noticed several louvers had been removed from the apartment window. A light bulb at the top of the stairs had been unscrewed as well. Entering the apartment, they saw last night's Dodger baseball program on the kitchen table. Nothing in the apartment seemed out of place. It wasn't until they reached the bedroom that they discovered what had so horrified her coworker. Jill Parenteau lay naked on the floor. An autopsy later that day would reveal the manner of death to be strangulation. DNA was recovered from the body and stored, though police had no suspects with whom to compare it.
Rodney Alcala's version of events differs substantially from Monique Hoyt's. After the teenager identifies him from a photo lineup, police show up at his mother's house to arrest the twice-convicted felon. They find their suspect relaxing in the living room, feigning surprise about why they're there. He tells them he completed parole months earlier and has been no threat to anyone since his rehabilitation within the prison system. But when he can't account for his whereabouts earlier that day, he's taken into custody and charged with rape. By the time of his formal interview with investigating officers, Rodney has his story down. Yes, he drove out to Banning with Monique Hoyt that morning to take photographs of her, and yes, some of the shots appear explicit, though they were in reality simulations. Given her age, it might not be appropriate, but there was no real sex, and it was with her consent. At least, it was at the beginning. Then Alcala surprises detectives when he admits that at a certain point, Monique's consent ended. Alcala claims he then panicked and choked her until she passed out. He further admits to stuffing her shirt into her mouth to shut her up. "You're in an unreasoning situation," he tells the officers. "Your brain just doesn't know what to do. You're not thinking." And then he says the words that put a punctuation mark on the interrogation session. "Yes," he nods, "I raped her." The officers are taken aback by his frank admission. Within hours, he's gone from not remembering the events of the day to the unequivocal statement that he raped Monique Hoyt. He's brought before a judge and bail is set at $10,000. Prosecutors are infuriated at the low amount, citing Alcala's earlier convictions for child molestation and parole violation. Rodney's mother manages to raise the bond, and a month later, the confessed rapist is back in her Monterey Park home.
Teenagers Tony Esparza and Joanne Murchland giggled at the thought of posing for a real photographer. It was June 19, 1979, and they'd been roller skating on the paved strip bordering the Strand at Huntington Beach when a man pulled up alongside them. He stuck his head out the car window and smiled, telling them how good they looked. He was handsome and very friendly, with long, curly hair coming down past his shoulders. He held up an expensive-looking camera and said he was studying photography. His school was holding a contest, and the best photo would win a cash prize. There'd be money for the girls, too, if their picture was selected. The 15-year-olds looked at each other. The guy's car was filled with all kinds of camera equipment. Sure, they told him, why not? They'd been warned not to talk to strangers, but it was the middle of the day at the beach with people all around, and they were flattered by the thought of being models. He got out of his car, and they asked what they should do. He had them skate a few yards away and then back towards him, quickly snapping off some shots. See? There was nothing to it. Pretty soon, they were striking poses and playing for the camera. After a few minutes, he said he had all the photos he needed. He was certain one of them would be a winner. Before getting back in his car, he asked for the teens' phone numbers so he could let them know if they won. When Tony said they couldn't do that, he asked for their addresses. Again, the girls refused. He shrugged and got into his car. He started the engine and stuck his head out the window. "Hey, what do you say we go off somewhere and get loaded?" Both girls skated away without looking back.
Rodney is enjoying the warming weather as spring unfolds into summer. Out on bail, pending trial for the rape of Monique Hoyt, he goes to the beach whenever he can, camera at the ready, snapping photos of bikini-clad sunbathers dotting the shoreline. He's recently given notice at the LA Times that he'll be leaving to set up shop as a professional photographer in Northern California. They wish him the best, happy their enterprising typesetter has finally set foot on his chosen career path. They assure him they'll miss his friendly face and ready smile around the office. By now, he's worked for the newspaper for a year, without anyone finding out about his convictions for child molestation, giving drugs to a minor, or parole violation. They know nothing about his recent arrest for rape, or his upcoming trial in September. They have no idea he's a registered sex offender, or that he's a person of interest in an ongoing murder investigation in New York. They never heard he was questioned about the Hillside Strangler murders, though they ran daily stories about the slayings for 4 months. They know Rodney Alcala only as a reliable employee, a friendly and easygoing coworker. Free of his job responsibilities, Rodney can turn his attention to his true passion. Though there is no photography job awaiting him in Northern California, there are many opportunities to find subject matter closer to home. He gathers up his gear and heads out to the beach to take some pictures. It's mid-afternoon when he pulls over on the road bordering the small sea cliff and kills the engine. He grabs his camera and gets out of the car. The sand quickly fills his street shoes as he trudges along, squinting in the bright sunlight. They are all around him now, these bikinied girls sunning themselves or splashing in the surf. So many to choose from. He's got his rap down, knows to tell them what they want to hear, touch that inner spot of vanity. It doesn't always work, of course, like those 2 little bitches yesterday. He was too quick, impatient. Should have remembered his own rules. Pull, don't push. Touch, don't grab. Don't make them feel uncomfortable. There'll be plenty of time for discomfort. Later. But it's a numbers game, and time and patience are his friends.
On June 20th, 12-year-old Robin Samso was looking forward to her first day at work, answering the phone at her ballet school. In lieu of cash, she would be receiving free lessons. The 7th grader had already decided she was going to be a ballerina, and nothing was going to stop her. When her mother could no longer afford the classes, Robin's instructor had set up the work-for-lessons arrangement. Robin was excited to return to class. But it was hours before she was due at the studio, and when her friend Bridget came over, the 2 girls decided to head over to Sunset Beach, only a few minutes away. They found a nice spot on a little ledge near the service road, sat down to watch the waves. They didn't notice the stranger until he was only a few yards away. The girls stifled a laugh. He was completely out of place at the beach in his plaid shirt and dress slacks. His street shoes looked ridiculous trudging through the sand. He must be a tourist, they figured, with that camera dangling from his neck on a brightly colored strap. When he suddenly came over to them, Robin and Bridget were startled, worried he might have heard them laughing at him. But he smiled and asked if it was okay if he took some pictures of them. They looked at each other and giggled. Why would anyone want photos of them? He told them how pretty they were and how he was in some kind of photography contest. They asked him what they needed to do. He told them to just act naturally and had them strike some poses. A few times he moved closer to position them a certain way, then backed off to take more shots. They were only at it for a few minutes when a woman's stern voice came from behind, asking them what they were doing. The man and girls looked over as one of Bridget's neighbors, Jackie Young, took the last 2 strides over to them. She had spotted them from across the beach and now stood defensively between the photographer and his subjects. The man who had been so talkative only moments ago turned his face away and stalked off without a word. It appeared to Jackie that once or twice he glanced back to see if she was following him. Then she turned her attention to the girls. He was only taking our picture, protested Bridget, not knowing what the big deal was. Jackie just shook her head and grabbed the girls' hands, walking them back to Bridget's place. Robin checked the time as soon as the girls walked in the house. It was already 3, and she was worried she might be late for her first day of work. Bridget agreed to let Robin borrow her bike for the short ride to the Stepping Stones Ballet School in Seacliff Village. She could return it tomorrow when the girls met at school. Even stopping off at home for her leotard, the trip shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Robin thanked Bridget and ran down the stairs to the laundry room to get the bike. Bridget said goodbye and went back inside. It would be the last time she ever saw her friend. Next time on The Dating Game Killer, a body is found and identified. A sketch of the suspect is made, and one of the detectives on the case recognizes the man from the dating game. Meanwhile, police begin to suspect Rodney Alcala is a serial killer. This is episode 3 of 6 of The Dating Game Killer from Hollywood and Crime. If you like what you've been hearing, be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. The Dating Game Killer was written and directed by Larry Brand and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, Tracy Patton, and Jim Carpenter for Hollywood and Crime. Recorded and designed by Julian Nicholson. Edited by Eric C. Fuentes and Julian Nicholson. And mixed by Mark Nieto for the Invisible Studios, West Hollywood. Executive producers Marshall Louis, Stephanie Jens, and Hernan Lopez.
One Nefarious Doctor, a hit podcast, and 15 million listeners later, Dr. Death is still making waves all over the world. Dr. Death is the true story of Dr. Christopher Dunch, a sociopath with a scalpel who left a trail of bodies behind him. Now, the phenomenon of Dr. Death is being reimagined in a new streaming series starring Alec Baldwin, Anna Sophia Robb, Joshua Jackson, and Christian Slater. Experience 3 brand new bonus episodes of the Dr. Death podcast where the cast interviews the real-life characters they portray in the streaming series. Golden Globe Award winner Christian Slater sits down with Dr. Kirby, the man who finally took Dunch down. Anna Sophia Robb talks to Michelle Shugart, the district attorney who put him behind bars. And Dr. Death host and reporter Laura Beale speaks with the full cast about how making the show changed their perspectives on institutions and the medical system. To listen to these new bonus episodes, follow Dr. Death on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or you can listen ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app.